is all might. All right, so we are recording and we are kicking off season 12, and this is the first episode of season 12 of Mention in Dispatches. And look, if we actually hit all of the episodes we are planning to do this season, we will close season 12 with the 150th episode of Mention in Dispatches, which is a little nutty to think. And so my guest tonight, Jim, you have been here since the beginning of Mention in Dispatches, and if I recall, the name of the show is your fault.
It was. There was a vulgar, crude, and undemocratic campaign to stuff the ballot box for it.
And it worked. It worked. It is now known as Mentioned in Dispatches. And somewhere along the way, probably back around season 4 or so, we managed to harangue Rocky into joining us for this, and we haven't gotten rid of him yet. So, Rocky, how you doing, man?
Well, with that sort of intro, maybe I won't be back next time. But no, hey, welcome. Thanks very much. Appreciate being here. It's been a wonderful journey so far. Let's get to 150 and make it even better.
Just to give the audience a taste of what is coming up, we are going to talk CSRs as we get closer to the voting opening for the CSRs, because there are some interesting things happening with categories and the way in which the vote, not the voting, but the organization of the awards is being kind of structured a little bit this year. And so we're going to have Gary on to talk about that. Right now, the plan is headed back to Gamma Expo. And so this time we're going to try and record. It's going to be a piece together patchwork sort of podcast, because we're going to grab a bunch of different people at Gamma Expo and record some short stuff with them and then piece them all together for a longer show. So that's two of the things we're going to do. We're going to have something from or leading up to Buckeye Game Fest. We're going to have a couple of somebody's playing the flute in the background. We're going to have a couple of practitioner-focused ones, especially with Connections Online coming up. So we're going to have a couple of people that do war games on the pro side, not the usual suspects. We've got a couple of new faces coming to talk to us about that one. We've got some interesting stuff lined up. Amabel is coming back. We're going to have a visit from Hollandspiel again also. So that'll be fun and entertaining. Tonight we are kicking off season 12 with a discussion of adventure war games. And I know everybody's like, what the hell's an Rocky, tell them what adventure war games are.
Well, adventure war games, it actually has been around sort of since forever. It really came to my attention when I was looking at the slug line under the 5 Parsecs from Home, which calls itself Solo Adventure Wargaming. And I was like, well, how the heck do adventures and wargaming go together? And really what I landed upon is you have war games, you have RPGs, and then there's something in the middle. And the something in the middle to me is these adventure war games. Elements of RPG play, strong. There's 5 Leagues in the Borderland coming up. I've got my 5 Parsecs from Home. Really what it is, it's skirmish war game rules in many cases with RPG elements thrown in. Light RPG elements, you build up certain members of your crew, your team, your party with some RPG-like skills, and then you go adventuring, and along the way it brings along a pretty robust combat system, hence the wargaming part of it. It becomes an interesting space for somebody like myself who's been a long-time wargamer, a long-time RPG player, always trying to sort of run into two of them together, and we always have. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons was a war game, is a war game, right? At least at one point TSR said it was. But nowadays, people, RPGs try to be RPGs, war games try to be war games, but really there is still some connective tissue in the middle, and that would be adventure war games. Light RPGs, narrative, more adventurous war games, whatever you want to call it, but it sits in the middle, and it's a fun place to explore and play with.
Well, I think all three of us are of the generation for whom hobby games weren't just Euro games, because those things didn't really exist at the time, but that adventure gaming world. And look, the guys that run the Origins Awards are the Academy of Adventure Game Art and Design, right? I mean, that's what it always was. And Jim, you and I have gone through old magazines and looked at what was on the ballots back in the late 70s, early 80s, where it was very war game heavy. But to us, these were all adventure games, right? Whether it was, Napoleonic war games, or whether it was, fantasy and sci-fi role playing, we moved pretty seamlessly between them all. And so, Jim, you guys have come back to this a little bit with some of your some of your tabletop simulator games where you've busted out some skirmish level war games that you guys have hammered around on.
Well, just taking a step back into what was just said, I mean, there's this weird vibe, and I grow tired of the argument because it approaches as pointless as what is a war game. I won't say it's that pointless because that's really pointless, but it approaches that level of pointlessness. Was D&D a war game, or was D&D a war game? Of course it was. It is so funny to hear the arguments to the contrary, but it's an argument that really isn't much worth having because it's really made by people today that, as suggested earlier, want to create that distance. I'm not a war gamer because I have a concept of what a war gamer is. Okay, fine. You just keep telling yourself that we're the ones that have problems discriminating. Take a look.
Just a slight digression. It's funny though when you talk about people want to argue with you that D&D a war game or not. It's probably from both sides because you have those classic old school Hex Encounter Uber Alles. Grognard's like, hell no, we're not letting those dirty nasty role players in here. D&D's not a war game. And on the other side, you've got the hardcore role playing crowd. They're like, hell no, D&D's not a war game. We're not letting those Hex Encounter guys into this room. So it's probably people from both sides arguing against it these days.
I don't know. Certainly in the day, there were a lot of wargamers that didn't want to get any RPG in their chocolate. They didn't, or I guess they didn't want to get any chocolate in their peanut butter. There were articles written about this, along the lines of
Origins in the early 80s.
Yeah, is our RPGs going to kill wargaming? Are they going to be the death of us? Little did they know that was the least of wargaming's problems in the long term. But that's merely a historical oddity as much as anything else. I think today there's this strange aversion. Even our dear friend Harold is, don't call it a war game. Don't even call it that. That's a divisive word. That's a word that puts people off. It's a useless argument. It's a useless, pointless argument. So I just spent 5 minutes having it. So forgive me. So when you step back from that, you then go into something that I will commend to all and sundry. If you haven't seen it, check out The Secrets of Blackmoor. It's a documentary done about the Blackmoor adventures that Richard Arneson put on. And how they became essentially D&D. They became a critical element of D&D. And why do I mention it in this context? Well, it's because Blackmoor was this gigantic war game. It was an adventure war game in the strictest possible sense. Oh, by the way, I just want to let you know, I was deeply disappointed to hear Rocky mention what we were going to be talking about. I thought, sure, this was going to be the day for wilderness survival to have its day in the sun.
It still can.
Yes.
Like you can steer the conversation in that direction.
I thought for sure this was the one chance for it to make its way into Mentioned in Dispatches.
If you are going to do that, you have to go flag your wife down and include her in the broadcast.
No. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason that Mr. Guillory is making the funny is because that is the one. My wife has a rule. She will play any game with me once. And it is, I'm blessed to have this. She will you throw it on the table. I'll learn it. Let's see it. I'll tell you if I like it. I tell you if I don't. I'll tell you if I don't care. That's the one she made me throw in the garbage. Literally. She insisted I throw it in the trash. But go to Secrets of Blackmoor. And what you see there is this gigantic table with a map all over it, covered with stuff. And they were having adventures that we would pretty easily identify as something that looks like a war game. Rulers are out and dice are being rolled and armies are meeting. And it's funny because and my memory of the documentary is fuzzy right as I sit here, but I believe it was Blackmoor Castle, the central castle in the story, that they finally besieged it. And they said, now we're going to sack it. And they said, where are you going to go? We're going to go underneath it. Well, what's underneath it? Well, it's a dungeon. And that's why they evolved the rules to crawl through that dungeon. That's where it comes from. That's its roots. So this idea of adventure war games, as was suggested earlier, is very, very old. It is part of our DNA. It is this back and forth thing. There's a lovely series of photographs that are showing up on the internet. I never know why internet. I swear there's an office somewhere in Poughkeepsie where somebody just funnels cool photographs onto the internet every now and again, hoping to, catch fire. There's a lovely series of black and white photographs that are appearing of Peter Cushing, who we all know is an avid miniatures painter, but he's playing a pirate game, and he's got an eye patch on. And this is Grandma freaking Tarkin here, and he's got an eye patch on, and he's got a headband, a bandana, and he's sailing around, and he's moving his painted soldiers around. He's doing something that I think we would call an adventure war game, because this distinction between RPGs and between war games in this evolutionary period was far less clear. There was no need for it. And I'll finally say, I think part of it was the fact that it was so low entry. The bar to entry was so low. Look at the materials that they're using. These are not, Donald Featherstone is doing his thing, and I, of course, respect the great one. But a lot of other people are playing with very small armies, or they're playing with paper and pencil, or they're playing with just a few figures, not even with counters, with toys, with little toys. And they're making up the rules as they go. There's no overhead to this. There's no rule sets that some guy wasn't copying and stapling on a mimeograph machine. Look it up, kids. Your mom will tell you about it. That are all these things. So this is very, very deep in us. And I think seeing it return the way it has is really, really cool. If it weren't for the fact that, to your exact point, Brant, there's a lot of people who are miniature war gamers, my clan, that are turning up their noses at them, saying they're not proper war games.
I mean, on one hand, like the idea of the skirmish war game, I mean, look, like Warlord, has half their business in bolt action, which is skirmish wargaming. I mean, that's
yes.
The commando raids and whatever else. I mean, this isn't, formation stands of figures marching across the battlefield. This is, ones and twos moving around, and it's a beautiful sight to behold. It's not a long, it's not a big jump from a man-to-man World War II game to the man-to-man sci-fi game or the man-to-man fantasy game. The one figures one person kind of thing. That kind of skirmish gaming happens all over the place, but the historical guys versus like the privateer press war machines and hordes guys, like those two dudes don't get along at all. They're doing the same stuff. It's just a matter of whether you call it a grenade or a fireball spell. I mean, it's doing the same thing, right?
But I think you got to go back to what Rocky was talking about, and this is critical. There, you can absolutely have people who say that Warhammer 40K is a war game. You can absolutely have people say that bolt action is a war game. What they often don't have, notice I say often, these days is what Rocky described as connective tissue.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, we have a campaign. Nope, not the same thing either. There's this sense of that we dive down onto the table, and these guys are going to continue past the present battle. There's going to be a story that evolves around them. For those who have watched our pint-sized campaigns for Chain of Command, the ongoing fights between players Achilles and the command tent, which has now gone on to 20 battles, I think. These things get stories. The commanders get better. They get worse. And I'm not even just talking about the metagame, which is fun all by itself. I'm talking about what happens to the actual players and the actual, the figures on the table. They get skills. They lose. I'll just give you a real simple example. We're currently playing 29 Let's Go, which is part of the Normandy campaign from 1944. And Achilles' commander has told him in the game, look, you got to go. You got to go and keep going. And if you don't, the commander, based on a real historical figure, panics and starts to pull him back. But Achilles has in his back pocket a friendship with this guy's superior who he can call in one time and try to let him keep going. So every battle matters. Every battle is going to push that narrative forward throughout that entire campaign. That is something that was always there in the beginning. In fact, it may have come from that. It has been so often discarded. And a lot of the books that Rocky was talking about are starting to put it back in. And that's really cool.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Rocky, you've noodled around with a couple of these. The 5 parsecs from home being one of them. I've got 5 Leagues from the Borderlands because where you lean a little more hard sci-fi, I lean a little more into the fantasy world. That's just That's my preference.
Yep.
But you've played it because over on your blog you cover a much wider swath of things than you necessarily write just for us, which is cool because it gives me other stuff to read. So, but as you've poked around some of these, you've had a couple of very decidedly military RPGs, as well as some war games that lean skirmish plus character advancement that kind of start to bridge back into RPGs a bit. Talk to us a little bit about where where those start to blend together in the middle for you.
So, I mean, I'll just go back to where, although today I look at something like 5 Parts X from Home has the the adventure war game. I went back to my collection. I really see like one of the first ones. I mean, you could argue Traveler had a lot of war game roots in it. I mean, it had a whole separate system that was the Striker. There was a whole set of miniature rules, 50 millimeter miniature rules for it. But the one that really made me think about adventure wargaming is all the way back to Behind Enemy Lines from FASA, which was you were a squad of infantry in World War II, and you went on missions. And really, what it was, I mean, it wasn't the strict dungeon crawl. I call it adventure by encounters. But basically, you would went on patrol, and you would every time you entered, almost like what Wilderness Survival did. Every time you entered a new hex on your map, you rolled for an encounter, and the encounter may be something benign. It may be, kick off a combat, maybe something you got to run away from, maybe something you got to fight and engage. But you had a mission, a campaign that was that were around there. You went on a mission, you had a task, you went off to go do it, and you had your team. And the RPG of it was actually fairly light. You had officers and enlisted. You had a couple of skills. It was a combat game, so almost all your skills were really combat, weapons, maybe some leadership, and then they threw in a couple other things like maybe land navigation.
None of it was flirting with the tavern wenches.
Well, sometimes you ran into the refugees or something like that. They were in there in ways. But it was just, it was still war game rules, because when you got into the battles, you were fighting a war game or playing them with a war game, but it was the connective tissue in between. How did you move from battle to battle? You didn't just page over to the next scenario. It wasn't, even when you had a campaign, and you see these elements even now in like the more modern versions, even when you have a campaign, you're going through, and what you do in one impacts the next. And it's not just like, oh, I suffered 6 unit losses here, so the next time I only get 3 replacement points or something like that. Now it's just your squad. What weapons do you take with you? What extra gear do you get? Did you get some reinforcements? Is there some NPCs, the rest of your squad? I mean, the modern version of Behind Enemy Lines really is War Stories from Firelock Games, which is you're a squad of soldiers in World War II going and fighting in Europe. They use the default setting there is the airborne troops, 101st. So you can go do your Band of Brothers sort of thing. But it's literally the same game. And it's the same thing. You adventure, you go by to encounter. You have little set pieces, but you have the connective tissue, which is the RPG elements, that makes it more than just, oh, I have a squad leader. I mean, it's something even like a squad leader. Yeah, they put a name on it, but that's really what it is. Here you have, hey, I have a squad leader, and this guy, nowadays they get like, what's your flaws? What are your virtues, things like that. But it all helps to build the story behind the battle that you're doing. And I'm just finding it a lot more fun. And then, of course, the people out there who don't like solo wargaming, maybe there's something here too, because it provides a nice structure that you can go from a campaign to campaign to campaign in the solo versions. But you don't have to play it solo. It's a skirmish game. You put it on the table. You can put it on the table physically. You can put it on the table virtually, and you just get out there and you play. But it's the connective story, like you were saying, the stories, the narrative that builds from battle to battle. becomes your big leader that eventually they reach a point where like, hey, I'm retiring that one, or they get wounded and you send them out in a grand way. It's the connective tissue that really becomes what keeps you interested, and from the sales point brings you back to the game again and again, which so many people say war games you play once, you never play it again. Well, this one you can just keep playing as long as you got your crew, and that crew exhausts itself, you go off and do something else.
There may be an edit point in the middle of all of this. My screen just locked up on me. I think you guys can still hear me, can't you?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you.
Got you just fine.
All right. There may be an edit point in the middle of all this because my screen just totally locked up on me here. And I was like, wait, am I even still connected? All right. Seems that I am, which is good. Maybe we'll just leave all this in and, let folks enjoy the fact that the screen. I never lost audio. I was hearing everything Rocky was saying. I just couldn't move the mouse or do anything. So that was a little weird.
Why? Are they broken?
Jim, thoughts, comments, reactions?
Yeah, a bunch of them, actually. Behind Enemy Lines is a great example. I think the best of that genre is the Ranger series by a now deceased brilliant game designer that was published by Omega Games. I fell in love with this system. I have every piece of it. And for those who don't know, it's played, you spend a lot of time prepping out your team. You get your mission, you have to gear out your team for the mission you're about to undertake. And then it uses a paragraph-based system, not unlike the classic Victory Games Ambush, but no hexes, because instead you play it using a grease pencil on a laminated map, and you use a distance scale a la a one-player Kriegspiel. And you have to lay out your movements, you have to lay out your encounters, sort of work them out. As is well known here, I do not care for solo gaming whatsoever. It puzzles me, to be honest. But I have long wanted, it's on my long and lengthening list of goals. I get the crew from Saturday Night Fights teases me. We there's this thing we speak of called the pile, which is the things we're hoping to get to. I don't have Unpainted Lead, but I do have a lot of games I built that we just don't get a chance to play. One of the things I absolutely have in that pile is Ranger, which from the beginning was an adventure war game. I think the roots of this, the more I think about it from a wargaming perspective as opposed to an RPG perspective, were that most elusive of things, the campaign. You play Waterloo enough, you play the Bulge enough, you play Gettysburg enough. I don't know how you play Waterloo enough, but I digress. You play these games enough, and then you say, well, I want to play a game that's part of a story, that's part of a campaign. And so we develop all these different kinds of campaigns. We're hoping, by the way, the Armchair Dragoons have been challenged by the Old Meldrum Wargamers in Old Meldrum, Scotland, to the 1813 campaign for Blucher. So we're going to have at that online. We have accepted Ross McGee's challenge, and we're going to go get them.
Are they playing with us?
They will. They're actually going to be our foes.
Oh, outstanding.
Yeah, so it's going to be the Scots versus the Americans. Although I've got Giorgio, who's at this moment French, and probably. Well, Giorgio's definitely going to play, and we may actually get one or two of our other British players to play. So there'll be a little transcontinental hink going on. But the bottom line is that he's developed this really lovely campaign map based on the game Napoleon by Columbia Games, which is one of the must-have Napoleonic games out there. So he's developed that. But even that, that's complex. You get these people that try to do Empire in Arms because you can do Empires in Arms and reduce it to a tactical battle. But all those things struggle because there's so much complexity that these things tend to creak and fall apart. Whereas other game systems that have tried this, another classical Traveler is certainly a great example, but the other one I always think of is Twilight 2000. Artie, the designers of designers of that absolutely intended that you would have your characters track each bullet. I know they changed that. Track each bullet and do all those things. But then there was going to be this, and I've got all the maps and the rules where you can set out your counters. And now it's not going to be miniatures. You could do it with miniatures, but it's not. It's with, squares. It's actually in hexes. It's squares and counters. And you go out there and you have a miniature war game, and the results will directly affect the RPG. So this impulse on the wargaming side, I think, derives from this desire for that elusive campaign, which can be so hard to put together, and so rarely comes to I give the lads at Little Wars TV all the credit in the world for pulling off a multi-month 1813 campaign. That's a big freaking deal, and most don't. And so this impulse to simplify it and to link it using, again, connective tissue, get the connective tissue out of the RPG universe and put it in there. That's been with us for a long time.
You bring up an interesting point around the campaign thing, and so this is something I want to ask both of you about. Although Jim, you will likely have some particular strong thoughts that I'm sure you've already ruminated on a bit over the years. One of the hallmarks of the point at which where you start to move out of pure skirmish wargaming and lean more into an RPG type role, I would contend, is not the point at which you leave the battlefield and start interacting in non-combat sorts of ways, but in the fact that there's a permanence of those characters within the game world, whatever game world that is, whether you're paratroopers behind enemy lines or whether you're fantasy raiders somewhere or whether you're 5 parsecs from home, that there is the permanence of those characters through the world means that the characters themselves change and evolve as the game progresses. More often than not, those characters are progressing along, gaining in skill and mastery and leveling up as they go through that game. Although in some cases they may just hang a left turn and go do something different as the game narrative unfolds. But I've very rarely seen that same concept applied at the larger macro level, where as a unit progresses through a campaign, the unit changes in its size, strength, composition, organization, whatever, that yes, you could sort of rebase the minis and add extra howitzers to this formation if you wanted, but it's rare that playing through something like a large Cold War Goes Hot game in Europe, that in the 6th scenario of this extended campaign, that particular tank company happens to be really damn good because they've survived a whole lot, they've learned a whole lot, they've gotten a lot better. The band of brothers from World War II, from the start of the war to where they ended the war, they got better at a lot of things. A couple things they didn't get they got worse at. The members of the unit evolved. The capabilities and the fortunes of that unit changed. What are your thoughts on the evolution of units where kind of the character, the unit of character, the character unit, I guess I'm stumbling for the words here a little bit, but I think you get the concept of what I'm after here, changes over the course of that campaign that you guys are about to fight out with the old Meldrum guys?
Sure. The simplest way that happens is we'll track casualties, right? They will go up or down in size. They will receive some amount of reinforcements depending on their circumstances. There will be things like that. But in terms of a unit improving, that has absolutely existed. It exists in Ranger that I mentioned. The men in your unit, one of the bog standard traits, I would say, of a skirmish game. Now, skirmishing is easier because you can, you get individual men, right? Yeah. And you can then say, all right, well, now it's an RPG. You get a point to spend, save up your points. And, the one I'm most familiar with in the Blue Book series is Stargrave, which is a pretty neat little system. In Stargrave, you can save up some points and make a unit, give it a power, or improve a stat. Or if it has a disadvantage, lift the disadvantage. I think they borrow all those things from role-playing games. They see the wisdom in there. In terms of a larger scale game, getting that, I think I should also say that there are some things in the we're playing a lot of General Darmé, and the 1813 scenario book for General Darmé does allow, in a small way, and this is important, in a small way, for the units to, they were once reservists or they were once recruits, now they're line. because they had experience of battle and didn't run away.
Building experience.
It has an ability to do that, but it's narrative. It's not point based. It's not calibrated. It's not balanced that way. So it is somewhat more limited. But there are some that have gone to units that I can think of. But I would say it's been much more skirmish than it has been, say the battalion and upward.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are all used to the idea of, well, that regiment took significant casualties, so it's only half strength. Oh, here come the replacements. Now it's back up to 3/4 strength for the next big battle that we're about to fight. Like we've all kind of seen some of that happen in some different games. And actually the World at War 85 series with the Drive on Gießen campaign that they included in the original Storming the Gap Kickstarter does a little bit of this where you'll take casualties, but you may not have enough to fully replenish them before the next engagement. And so now you're starting a little short of forces, but you've got a battalion, like you said, you've got a battalion of new recruits out there that manages to take, they have a good performance on the battlefield. Their left and right flanks happen to perform well also, and they only take 20% casualties. Well, you backfill that 20%, but 80% of your battalion now has at least one battle under their belt, maybe a second battle under their belt. And so by the time you're 2, 3, 4 battles in, your green replacements are only making up 15 to 20% of your total strength, and the other 75 to 80%, 85% of your unit is now 4 or 5 battles within the campaign. You would like to think that those guys are now better than just green quality troops, and some form of mechanism for character progression where the character is the battalion, not the individual man. I say battalion, regiment, brigade, picket, like whatever unit of maneuver we're using for the scale that we're at. It's not something that's common in the wargaming world. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I don't think it's very common. Rocky, what do you think?
I want to say Stryker, going all the way back, has an element where even though you have individual people in there, that you assess your unit morale based upon some sort of like algorithm. You add up how many veterans, how many regulars, how many green you have, and that is how you arrive on your unit morale. So yes, if you have a unit that is composed mostly of green troops, it's going to have the green, status. But if you can seed it with the right veterans, if you seed it with the right, can make up for that greenness out of them. I also want to say that there are some games out there. I've seen some games that have a campaign system that go with that. I can't remember which one, but there's one that's sticking in my mind. At least I can see the rule in my mind where the first time you fight, your unit maybe is green, but okay, after they've been through combat once, twice, they lose that green status, regardless of casualties. I mean, they've now been bloodied. They've faced into battle, and now so they're no longer that green status. They've moved up away. So sometimes you see it in elements of some of the campaigns, but I would agree with you, it's not a widespread, partially because I think, to get to Jim's point, campaigns is not something that war games do a lot. You have scenarios, sometimes you have some scenarios that connect together, but many times there isn't that narrative piece between the two of them. It's like, hey, what you did in one directly leads to the next. Not like an adventure war game, which very much is you have that your crew is in there and can do different things. One part I really love about what Modifius is doing with their 5 parsecs, whether it's 5 parsecs from home, 5 parsecs or 5 leagues from the borderline, whatever. The crews, your parties, your teams are not just there for combat.
Yeah.
I'm looking at like all the different supplements that go with 5 parsecs from home. You can do scavenger jobs. You can do city fights, street fights. Their new bug hunters, bug hunt game will be able to say, hey, you can take your team and go off and join the Corps, or maybe you're in the Corps and you want to go off and, hey, we're sick and tired of this. We want to go make some money on the side, go freelancers someplace. So, I mean, there's the narrative story, the campaign adventure behind it is really coming to the forefront. And it's nice to see that. And again, sort of like going back to the roots. I mean, we always were adventure gaming. as a war gamer, I really am getting a chance to play some adventure war games. I still get to play my war game, but I'm also playing my adventures out of it. And it's, I think we're at a nice time right now because there's some really good systems out there. A lot of the blue books that thing, Jim, what you're talking about there is the Osprey series, a lot of different games that they have coming out. It's the same thing. There's a story behind a lot of those games. Again, there's skirmish many times because that's the best way sometimes, or maybe the easiest way to make the story out of it. But it's not just, hey, I'm not just playing a battle, and I'm not just going back and doing the Battle of Waterloo all over again, though this time I can do the Battle of Waterloo as though my team was there, and maybe you do your sharps there and become part of it because that's the adventure.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, well, two things here. One, as you were, before I get to that thought, as you were talking, Rocky, one of the things that sprang to mind, the FAB series, the Fast Action Battles series. I know this is present in Bulge. I think I remember it being present in Sicily also. I've not played Golan, so I don't know for sure that it is. You've got blocks, and those blocks rotate as you take damage, like every other block game on the planet. And as you're rotating to take damage, the pips on there, the number of dice that you're rolling, but they're also color coded as to what status you are, whether you're recruit level or just regular line level, or whether you're an elite level unit. And those will confer different bonuses on the units. In some cases, you may get a bonus to combat. In other cases, you may be rolling your hits first. But there are some units in the FAB series that as they take damage, so the number of dice that they're throwing in combat goes down, but their quality goes up. So you're losing one thing but gaining another because the quality is going up as you're surviving those battles and continuing to fight through them. So that is a place where you see it. I think one of the things you mentioned behind enemy lines as one of kind of the key military stories there. Twilight 2000, we all know, is sort of this post-apocalyptic thing of you're literally just you're military veterans, but you're literally trying to survive. A lot of the war game RPG hybrids in there on the military side, whether it's Merc, whether it's V Commandos, whether it's whatever, 148 Tactic. A lot of those, what you see is your commandos, your paratroopers, your some sort of special force. And it's not just the issue of, oh, these are the elite guys, so they're cool, they get to wear berets, right? Part of it is if you're a bunch of grunts in 148 infantry and you're 3rd Platoon Bravo Company, guess what? Like, you're not running around freelancing, right? 3rd Platoon Bravo Company is marching a battle between 2nd Platoon Bravo Company and 1st Platoon Charlie Company, right? You're moving out in formation in your company, within your battalion, or if you're task organized into your task force, within the brigade scheme of maneuver to go. There ain't a whole lot of room for telling a lot of individual story there, right? You're sort of stuck in formation where you're going. And so that does limit the storytelling a little bit that you could otherwise do. If you've got that small unit of somebody off doing just their one little self-contained set of series of actions in that campaign environment.
So that's where what War Stories from Firelock Games tries to do, at least in one level. They have their version of a mass battle rules is you have. You figure out what is your larger unit. You're just a squad, so maybe you have your battalion, and it has a very simple. Okay, my battalion, the battalion I belong to, has X number of dice. The other side has a comparable unit or something has X number of dice, and it actually has a little flow, a little sequence of play where you do your scenario, you do your adventure encounter, and it even says, the rules say, like, when you reach a point where you sort of like finished your little piece, pause and go through these other steps to figure out what's going on in the battle around you and the connective tissue. Maybe your little mission was to go, knock out the enemy command post, go hit them. Okay, you succeeded. Okay, that becomes a die shift in your favor in resolving the next pieces. Maybe it's a takeaway from them, it's a plus up for you, and you roll and you figure out, okay, we succeeded, the unit proceeded on its mission or achieved its objective or is achieving its objective. And then there's a casualty piece where it's okay, because it's all the units are reduced, abstracted down to just a number of dice. Hey, they have 5 dice left. We were able to be successful. Now we're down to 2, or they're down to 2, or we're still sitting at 5. So then you roll this around again. It's like, okay, are they going to withdraw? Are they going to keep fighting? Is it going to be, last stand or something like that? So the adventure builds in there. It's a little bit of a clunky system, but it's there. Somebody's at least trying to make the attempt of building this larger mass campaign. I think some of the early versions, like T2K, Behind Enemy Lines, was really, it never really wanted you to be in part of the big battle. You were always your little piece, or it's after the war. You're not really fighting as a unit anymore. You're this small little team that's trying to escape to get back home. Many times it was, T2K was basically medieval Europe in the 21st century, late 20th century, medieval cantonments. And it was a dungeon. It was a wilderness crawl adventure in many ways.
It was a hex crawl with, sort of equal parts Mad Max and Rambo, So
exactly. But the big part nowadays with these adventure games is, and I really like it. I hadn't thought about it before. Thanks, Jim, for putting the thought out there, is that the campaigns and the adventures. Mm-hmm. So with now these 5 parsecs from home, is you have a series of missions, but you auto generate, you keep going. You can take like I said, nowadays the way it's getting to the point, you can take a whole left turn. Like, hey, you know what? We were bug hunters. I have my team, my crew here. We were bug hunters. And you know what? We're just sick and tired of going down and facing, spit and poison bugs all the time. We're going to switch over here and go to a scavenger job because I want to make some money.
Yeah.
It's just a totally different way. I want to retire, not with, acid burns in the body. I'm going to go off to make some dough here on the side. May not be totally legal, but hey, that's part of the adventure.
Retire by choice rather than lack of appendages.
Exactly.
The 12th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters who pledged at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Michael Sundborg, Fred and his dog, Chet Bell, Hellcat6, Patrick Garrity, Stagger Wing, Kevin Bertram, Mike Quigley, Martok, and Joseph Nall for their support of the Regiment of Strategy Gaming, which helps us bring you the best strategy gaming articles, events, and this podcast. You can join us as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
Jim, some of your guys' games on Saturday Night Fights, and I keep coming back to that as kind of a touchstone, as a reference. One, because you play a shit ton of them, right? So, this is fresh in your mind. But two, folks can go back and watch you guys playing these things. So if they need a frame of reference, like they go dial up the YouTube stream and go watch the game. Some of the games you guys have done have been pretty low scale. Like, we're not talking your guys' games of Leipzig at the platoon level that y'all keep trying to do, but something more like, your Charlie Company games. Mm-hmm. You've got your U.S. squad, heading into the village on a VC hunt there. And at some point, somebody's looking for a tunnel, after finding 5 or 6 tunnels. Does that guy ever get better at finding tunnels after he's been ambushed 4 or 5 times from tunnels he didn't find? Does he ever get better at finding tunnels because he wants to survive? Like, is there any sort of progression built into some of those games, or are they just all kind of one shot? Here's our battle. When that's done, we'll move on and do something else.
Well, man, there's a lot of answers. Let me first respond to Rocky's comment about the big game. Allow me to point to the pinnacle of that attempt. I think it's probably the boldest attempt. It succeeds in large part, in my judgment, and you can see us play it on the channel. It is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Battle System. This was a game system that they released this was the 2nd edition, particularly in 1989. And it was specifically designed to allow you to take your 2nd edition D&D character when he got into the biggest of battles, full-on armies, dragons, hordes of orcs, hordes of goblins, literally any monster in 2nd edition D&D. You could put it on the table and your character could fight it and have a credible chance at doing one of those Tolkien survival things, where suddenly my guy runs out in the field into a swamp of low-level orcs and cuts a swath through them all by himself. It is the only game system that has ever managed that even close.
Point of order. War Machine predates Battle System by a couple of years. It's still TSR doing mass combat within a D&D context, but War Machine was in the companion rules, which came out 85, 86 time frame and predates second edition D&D. Now, War Machine battle system absolutely takes those concepts and runs with them, where War Machine was kind of just an extra set of mechanics that were built into the companion level game, because
I don't think that's a fair. I
Dominions, they had a very simplistic.
Yeah, I reject that comparison. I mean, they're different games. War Machine isn't a complete game.
No, but it was never intended to be. But a lot of the concepts from War Machine are the underlying basis on which battle system was built.
Yeah. I mean, War Machine is much more like what Rocky was talking about, which also shows up in Savage Worlds and a number of other places. Very highly abstract. It also shows up very similarly in Birthright.
Yeah, yep. I was going to find a way to call attention to the old Beckme series.
I see. That's interesting. No, I've played some War Machine over the years. I've never run it. It's interesting. I've never run or built for it. By that argument, by your argument, I have neglected chainmail, right? Which is the father from which all these things come.
Well, the directionality, I think, matters in the chainmail comparison, in that chainmail starts with the battle and bolts all the other stuff on.
Yeah.
Whereas the other, both War Machine and Battle System start with a bunch of role-playing adventure characters and then bolt the mass combat onto that and do it the other way. But where in the case of both War Machine and Battle System, essentially what they've done is they've made the army into a character, right? You have a derived set of statistics for the army as a whole based on its composition. And so now you have an army that has basically a bunch of character stats, right? Your basic force rating, your troop class, your whatever these numbers are, that combine to give you a set of stats for the army as a whole that you then dice off against each other.
You see, and that's where War Machine and Battle System are different, right? Yeah. War Machine or Battle System has individual figures formed on bases, which form ranks, which there's facing, there's wheeling, there's all sorts of the other fairly robust components of a miniature war game.
Yeah,
so. Yeah. It's a different creature. I mean, it is interesting, and it's one of the longer conversations about the history of D&D. While they have never, why they never managed to bring a really big. I don't really have a good gauge for how successful Battle System or War Machine or any of the other iterations. I know Birthright did not succeed. It sold well, but it never collapsed of its own weight. There's just so bloody much in that thing. The Castles expansion alone is stone cold glorious, which I still have. And it's so it's those things where it's never managed to go to that level. So to me, Battle System remains the pinnacle of that effort. Where I can put out my second edition D&D character and onto a tabletop, run him at a unit of orcs, and I know how to resolve that, how those orcs are going to move, how those orcs are going to shoot, how he might shoot, how his spells will work if he has spells, all that stuff. It doesn't work at at a certain point, it starts to creak as it gets bigger and bigger. But I will say this, it is the infinite superior of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, partially because it is rooted in. But spinning around from the highest levels, I think to your point or to your question, to me, it's about the fact that miniatures gamers now, especially maybe as we're older, maybe as we're related, we're trying to get other people into the game, our kids, or we're just trying to get our families into them because families playing war games is so cool. These skirmish games have been very, very successful on that level. Yeah. You paint up 50 figs maybe, and they're not all, as much as this makes me sad, they're all not French voltigeurs advancing. They are.
Just go buy some old HeroScape figures, and they're already painted.
Well, right, yeah, exactly. Or you could grab HeroScape. That's a great example. You grab HeroScape. You can grab toys. You can grab whatever you want. and you put them out on the table, and or with some of the stuff like Stargrave and Frostgrave and some of the other related games, they've put out their own limited lines of miniatures that work. Or you could even go really far back and dig out your Star Frontiers minis, which are really still very good. I've still got them, so you can do all that. And you put it out on a table, and to the point that got us here in the first place, talking to Rocky about this, you can put in a character. It's very simple. It's doesn't have a ton of stats, but they get a mission and they can play. I'll give you the other example of this, one that has gotten no attention, and that's a darn shame because we've played it and it's a lot of fun. A Billion Suns. A Billion Suns is a terrific. It's a weird hybrid of tabletop miniature game, board game, and RPG. And it involves you going out, flying around, jumping through wormholes, completing missions, all these other things, all while trying to create your own characters, which are ultimately fleets. So all of these, and if you go to the Osprey Wargame books, you'll see them all. They all have an element of that. I mean, shoot, even the Dragon Rampant series, of which we're very fond on the Saturday Night Fights group, every single one of the Rampant's books, Xenos Rampant, Dragon Rampant, Lion Rampant, The Men Who Would Be Kings, has some campaign options built into them so that either your units, your leaders, or both can improve or become worse between battles and even the course of a whole campaign. So there's, especially in the smaller scales, there's a real draw for this.
Wasn't Men Who Would Be Kings? Please tell me it was originally called Zulu Rampant.
I don't know if it had another name. It is
nomenclature of the rest of the line.
Yeah, it is interesting that it is the only one that was not blessed with a rampant name. Or that's not true, because Rebels and Patriots is in the Rampant series and also does not have the name.
That's probably because they didn't want to piss off a good chunk of their audience by calling it Yankees Rampant.
Well, that's a whole nother story. I mean, they were ready to do this thing. They were ready to put out their Napoleonic version of it. And they then separately agreed for some insane reason to create the much inferior Chosen Men. And so Rebels and Patriots was allowed to die on a vine without a Napoleonic expansion. But that is a story for another time.
For going back to Rocky's point about something like T2K or Behind Enemy Lines, but taking those military, so they're look, in the case of T2K, it was hypothetical near future at the time, but the historical RPG and spinning that forward into sort of maybe the more combat heavy experience that becomes more wargamey, but with the connective tissue of the campaign. We've got Nations and Cannons out there that is now running around with the American Revolution series. Guys, the Players Aid are hugely fond of it. And we had a pair of Nations and Cannons sessions this year in January at the ACDC that Flag Bearer Games seems to be making some inroads on this, which is pretty cool. Folks should go watch the Gaming the American Revolution panel that we had at the ACDC where Harold Buchanan and Merle from NSDM and Pat Mooney from Flag Bearer Games talked about their three different approaches to building games around the American Revolution. But Flag Bearer with their historical stuff, some of the different military ones. Jim, there's got to be a Napoleonic role-playing game out there, right?
There is a book for GURPS. There is GURPS Napoleon. Which I own, but more importantly,
soccer.
Yeah, I know. More importantly, look up Legion of Honor.
Yeah.
Legion of Honor is amongst the strangest board games ever created, and I adore it. It is a bunch of guys sitting around a table playing cards. It's a card game essentially, and the each of you is a soldier, beginning either as a sergeant or a sous-lieutenant in the army of the Revolution. And as the card play goes on, you meet women, you have battles, you fight duels, you do any number of things, all with the goal of trying to get Napoleon's notice, make money, be brave in battle, and not get killed.
I noticed all of your combative actions came after you mentioned meet women.
Yeah, well, and the meet women module, it's funny, the meet women module is an optional phase. You don't have to play with it. Again, I want to repeat, it's a very, very strange game because it doesn't seem to go anywhere. But when you're done playing it, you realize your character has played through the entire Napoleonic era and has fought in all the great battles of the era, or maybe didn't. Maybe he was wounded. Maybe he was in a hospital. But your buddy did, and Napoleon saw him, so he liked him more, and that led him to getting a grant of land. And because of that grant of land, he married the girl that you were both wooing together, and now you're mad at him, so you challenge him to a duel, and you kill him, and she hates you. Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy, and it's up to 6 people that have at this. It's a strange game. It's very, very strange, but yeah, it is as close as it is a true Napoleonic adventure game, I would say.
Yeah, sounds like a blast.
No, and it's a game that I could see a person. It's a little complex. You also have to know the history to have it, I think, be a lot of fun, because there's these moments, if you're a Napoleonicist, going through it of, oh, this is Marengo. Okay, good. I get to be in Marengo. So that means Napoleon will be there, or no, he won't be. Dang it. And it's by Clash of Arms, the guys in whose care and keeping La Bataille is. So
for the moment. As we start to wind down the discussion of adventure war games here, there was no real agenda. There was no real, intent to drive this to a conclusion. We're just sort of kind of on an aimless wandering walk through the woods. And as long as we kind of remember where we parked the car, we're going to be good. We'll consider this a success. But, Rocky, you're the one here who's probably done more with the idea of the adventure war game, because you've been playing a bunch more of them and talking about a bunch more of them lately. Is there any key component or facet of this that we haven't hit that we should have in the discussions tonight?
I don't know if I call it a key facet, but maybe one observation. So I think one of the reasons that I like adventure wargaming as much as I do is because it is grounded and draws heavily upon the war game world. I went through recently and tried to look at some of the more military-oriented, so to speak, RPGs out there, and tried to do some military gaming. And so those ones approaching from a very, very individual RPG character, and maybe it was the systems I was playing. Some Mongoose Traveler, looking at even the war stories that I've mentioned here. When you started from the RPG side, and so when you're going in combat, you're focusing on, okay, here's my character, this is what they're doing, and this is how it's affecting all the other people. It becomes clumsy. It's, at least to me, it becomes clumsy. And maybe again, it's not, I'm not exactly in the right system. I'm doing some Year Zero engine, some Cepheus, some additional Traveler pieces. But it just, when you're starting on the RPG side, and I understand what they're trying to do is you're trying to do, trying to make your character have their role and their piece. An early version of this was the fastest Star Trek simulator, where every character had their sheet in front of them, which was their control panel on the bridge of the Enterprise. So the engineer was running the engineering, and the helm was running the helm, and weapons were running weapons. You're trying to get it all together, so you're trying to sync together as a team. That's very role-playing, and it had some trouble to me making it into the transition to the war game world. So when you go all the way to the one end of the spectrum and started from the RPG side, I think the system stumbles. But what works well is when you have seems to work well, at least to me, is when you have a good, solid, simple, not overly complex war game system, and you grasp some light RPG elements onto it, and that build together, that connective tissue, creates the adventure that then really pulls you into it. You're not bogged down into individual characters. You're not, doing an entire unit. You're just doing your little squad, your little group there. And it just, the adventure sort of builds out from that, becomes personal and builds the narrative. I just wanted to make, that last point, RPGs, great, but when you move RPGs more to the military, sometimes it stumbles. But war games to RPGs and the adventure in the middle seems to be working out very well.
Jim, what do you think? Thoughts, reactions?
Well, I think that's true. I saw it so desperately. I was in high school, and I tried to run a Star Frontiers game where everybody was on the deck of the Enterprise, because I think we all wanted to do that. And I think some of those things have come to us much better in board games. There are some lovely, lovely board games simulating exactly that. Related thereunto is there's quite a few board games that let you do that, including a certain game that allows you to play as the crew of a submarine against another crew of a submarine, which I've argued, by the way, is far more a war game than not Twilight. Well, why is this not no, I was it's certainly, yes, no, I was not thinking of you. I was thinking of WoW, the game that nobody thinks is a word game, but everybody loves it.
Twilight Struggle.
Thank you. Which is far more of a game than Twilight Struggle ever dreams of being. It's certainly more than U-Boat ever was. But it is just a team of people. That's actually a really good example, although it doesn't have any developmental pieces. That game, if you've ever played it, is a stone cold blast. And it's team building, and it's exciting. It's a war game, and it's an adventure game in its own way, because you're working together towards a common goal, and you've got to try to figure it. Now, it's very channelized and it's very simplistic, but some of those games have done that much better. But no, I think the place that RPGs have found in the wargaming space is very healthy. I think, as I said at the beginning, it's really just a return to the roots of all this. It's not abnormal. It's not from a different line. It is who we are. It's what we've always been. And everybody will have their own different tolerance. Some people just don't want that role-playing stuff in there. They don't like it. Some want a little bit, a little flavor. Some want a lot. Some want a ton. Every table is different. Every experience is different. None of them are wrong. None of them are right. The only people with whom I make war are those that suggest that RPGs aren't, that D&D isn't a war game, or that wargaming isn't the root of this entire hobby, because it most certainly is.
Well, hey, we're sitting here with the 200th anniversary year of the original Kriegspiel, right?
Yep.
So
yeah, and there is no universe. There are several books that say this. I've thought it. I'm here to defend it. There is no such thing as a dungeon master if Georg von Reiswitz hadn't given us the Empire.
Rocky, as you were mentioning some of the different hybrid RPGs that you'd looked at, there was at least one back in the days when Dungeon Magazine and Polyhedron were merged into one magazine, and depending on whether you started from the front or the back, you got one or the other. There was a World War II little mini RPG. I think it only went up about 10 levels, built on the old 3rd edition OGL engine that was in an issue of Polyhedron magazine. So when you start talking about all these different engines you could build something on, somebody had actually built a mini RPG on the D&D 3E OGL edition out there.
Oh yes, it can be done.
Yeah, I was noodling around trying to find it and find it online, and I'm not even finding the appropriate. I have a copy of it on PDF somewhere. It's going to be on an external hard drive, and I'm not digging that out right now while we're in the midst of recording. So I know it exists. I just can't remember what issue number it is. So maybe by the time this posts, we'll have the issue number down below in the article feed if I remember to go back and dig it up after the fact. So I think for us, for me, it's a little weird because the idea of an adventure war game, like, this is the shit we grew up with. Like, this is what we were playing. And so to me, the idea that in today's market that needs its own unique descriptor just seems a little weird, because to me, that's just another kind of hobby game. And that's just another one of those adventure games that we played all the time growing up. But there's a couple of things. First of all, I now admit that I now understand, although it pains me to say, there's at least 2 generations behind us that are now in the game world for whom that wasn't always true. Like, the stuff we grew up playing got much more heavily segmented in the marketplace by the time those 2 generations behind us were getting into the marketplace and doing their thing as well. So to an extent, they are victims of the maturation of the industry, such that things have become much more stratified and much more micro-targeted to certain tastes and niches. I don't know that that's a good thing, because I would like to think that we were we were a little more robust and well-rounded gamers at the time. And I think there's probably some significant evidence to back that up, even if I don't have it right off the top of my head. But I think it would be a cool thing for more people to sort of dance a little closer to the edge there, right? Get a little closer to those hybrids that kind of cross the space between your normal comfort zone and something that may be adjacent to it, and give it a try and see what you think. And you may come back and you know, as happened with Jim and his lovely bride, may come back from wilderness survival and go, God, I'm never doing that again. Right. But you may find something that you like that kind of expands the horizons a little bit. And as a result of that, you've now found a greater space of potential common ground to game with some other folks, which is not a bad thing, you know, on balance. So, I think we're going to leave it there because, you know, My goal for season 12 is to keep these episodes a little bit shorter, not because I'm trying to, you know, not overtax the audience's ears. I'm sure they would love to listen to us ramble plenty. If they've stuck through us this long, they're fine listening to us. Somebody's got to edit this shit, right? And that somebody is me. And I would like to get to the point where I'm not losing like 4 hours of my life every week to having to edit podcasts. So if we can keep these a little shorter this season, that makes my life a lot more pleasant for getting these things done, and a lot more likely that we will have a season 13 after this. So, Jim, thank you very much for taking some time out and, you know, peeling yourself away from Tabletop Simulator long enough to come chat some games with us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, entirely my pleasure.
And Rocky, thank you for being here to join us, but also for inspiring tonight's topic.
You're welcome.
That. So, and audience, thank you for coming back to see us on season 12. Look, I say coming back to see us. I'm hoping there are some first-time listeners joining us for this one, because it'd be really cool if we were still picking up some first-timers. And I hope you like what you hear and you stick around and continue to ride this really weird wave that we're on as we roll forward through season 12. Again, you know, like I've mentioned it off and on occasion. Please, if you can, go to your podcast platform of choice, whether it's Spotify or iTunes or whatever. You know, leave us some kind of rating, leave us some kind of short review, just because that level of engagement will help us rise up in the rankings for potential recommendations down the line and help other people discover our podcast also. So we hope you've liked it enough to do that for some folks. We appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time on another episode of Mentioned in Dispatches.